They're turning the frickin' penguins gay. More specifically, they're turning the penguins transgender and then giving them gay penguin parents at an aquarium in London. We will examine a brief history of the sexual revolution in the animal kingdom. Then, 3 pieces of great news all in a row for the Trump administration. Some bad news in the Democratic primary, especially for Joe Biden as we head into tonight's debate. And finally, the mailbag. All that and more. I'm Michael Knowles, and this is The Michael Knowles Show. You know, I've been a little under the weather the past few days. This has given me more of a gravelly voice, and I thought, Lord, why do I have this sickness on a very busy week? Then I realized it was all so that I could perfect my Alex Jones voice for the biggest story of the day. They are turning the frickin' penguins gay. Can we get Alex Jones up here about the frogs?
It because I don't like gay people. I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay. Do you understand that? Serious crap.
Forget the frogs. They are turning the penguins gay. A London aquarium has announced that 2 lesbian penguins are now going to raise a genderless penguin chick. How is that possible? You would maybe suggest there are a few problems with this. 1, penguins aren't lesbians. And 2, lesbians can't produce a child. And 3, despite gender ideology existing in the academy and in the mainstream media and in left-wing politics, in the human world, in the animal kingdom, our gender ideologies don't quite apply, and the penguin will either be a male penguin or a female penguin. None of that matters. The way that this is happening is that the zookeepers or the aquarium keepers in London have identified 2 penguins who spend a lot of time together, both female. They've called them lesbians. They then took an egg from another penguin couple, taken it away from its parents, and then given it to these lesbian penguins, and then they're going to raise the penguin without any of the stereotypes of the gendered penguin society. I don't think there are really any stereotypes, and the whole thing doesn't make a lot of sense. It also, before we get to the London Aquarium trying to defend this bizarre decision, I should point out what the left is actually doing here is ripping a child away from its parents and keeping it in a cage, which is the same thing that we've heard is the worst possible thing in the world for the past 2 years of the Trump administration. There's nothing worse than taking a child away from its parents and keeping it in a cage, and yet that is exactly what the left is doing with this poor would-be genderless penguin and the lesbians at the London Aquarium. That point is neither here nor there. Here is a staff member of the London Aquarium defending this decision and explaining how exactly a penguin can be raised without a gender.
What we wanted to do was to take the opportunity to raise the whole conversation with guests who come through to the aquarium, just to raise that exact point, that there is a difference between gender and sex. And in terms of the way that we manage the colony at the aquarium, we wouldn't manage them differently based on whether they are females or males. What we wanted to do with this chick was give guests an opportunity to meet that individual and learn about its personality without assigning it any sort of preconceived sort of gender roles.
What gender roles are there in the penguin kingdom? I mean, all penguins wear tuxedos. They don't even have gender roles in terms of their clothing. They all wear the male clothing. Again, neither here nor there. Also, what makes you think that you can take away the gender roles, if there are gender roles, from the penguins? You can't talk to the penguins. You can't tell the penguins to behave a certain way. You can't educate the penguins. They're penguins. They don't have higher intellect. So many errors in what she said. The big error that she begins with is that there is a difference between gender and sex. This is what we have been told. This is now being taught in first grade. This is being taught all the way back in our public schooling and in the popular culture. There is no difference between gender and sex. The very fact that they make this statement so breathlessly shows you that they don't have a very good argument here. For basically all of human history, there was sex. What is your sex? You can be either male or female, man or a woman. Then, in the popular use of the language about 50 years ago, the term gender was introduced to apply to human beings. Gender never really applied to human beings before. Gender is a grammatical term. When you're learning a foreign language, you have gendered nouns, for instance, masculine and feminine. Pizza ends in A, that's a feminine noun. Gatto is a masculine noun, ends in an O. They applied this term to human beings to create the impression that there is a difference between sex and gender. But there isn't any actual distinction. You don't just have to take my word for it. You can ask them for this. You know, one of the arguments that leftists use to say that there's a difference, because you'll say, what is the difference between sex and gender? They'll say, well, sex is biological and gender is socially constructed. But then they immediately contradict themselves when they say that people can be, for instance, females born in male bodies, women born in men's bodies. Or they'll say, you know, that their brains are female, but the rest of their bodies are male. If that is the case, then gender is not socially constructed. Then gender is innate, just like biology, right? If you are born as a man inside a woman's body or a woman inside a man's body, then it's not a social construction of gender. They're both innate. They're both with you from the beginning. You didn't choose to be that way. You were born this way. Or if you say that you have a male brain and a female body or vice versa, then again, that's not socially constructed because the brain is biological. That's physical matter. So any way you slice it, what they're trying to say is sex and gender are both biological, and sometimes what they're trying to say is sex and gender are both socially constructed, as in the case of when you hear these leftists say that you can have a biologically female penis or a biologically male uterus. They can't reconcile this because they can't grant themselves the notion that there is such thing as a metaphysical world or as a soul or as something that isn't just matter. So any way you slice it on their own arguments, there is no difference between sex and gender. And I know that this is being taught everywhere. The best way to confront this argument is just ask them, what's the difference? And then when they say, well, one is socially constructed, you say, well, what if you're born this way? If you're born this way, it's not socially constructed. What if you have a male brain and a female body? It will break down. That argument breaks down. This tells us quite a lot. The reason I bring up the penguins, obviously, I don't really care about the sexual habits of penguins, but the way that we human beings treat sex in the animal kingdom tells us a lot about how we treat sex among ourselves. And this has been going on a long time. And coincidentally, penguins, for some reason, are always the subjects we use, going back to the gay penguins, so-called, of the 1990s. We'll get to that in 1 second.